community on Jarrah country, and that the members and elders of the Jarrah community and their forebears have been custodians here for many centuries, have performed age-old ceremonies of celebration, initiation and renewal. We acknowledge their living culture and their unique role in the life of this region and pay our respects to them. And this morning we welcome Reverend Dr. Richard Leonard. Richard tells me that he has the best job in the world because he gets paid to watch movies. He's the director of the Australian Catholic Office for Film and Broadcasting. And he not only gets paid to watch movies, he also has served on juries at film festivals in Venice, Berlin, Warsaw, Hong Kong, Montreal, Brisbane and Melbourne, and has lectured on faith and culture all over the world. So he probably does have the best job in the world, really. He has degrees in arts, education and theology, is a graduate of, from the London Film School and has a PhD from the University of Melbourne. He's honorary professor of the Australian Catholic University, a visiting scholar within the School of Theatre, Film and Television at UCLA, and a visiting professor at the Pontifical Gregorian University in Rome. And he's also written a number of books. These are the three that are the most popular. What are we doing on earth for Christ's sake? Why bother praying? And where the hell is God? We have, I believe, those available at the bookshop, at the university bookshop over near the, over near the SU. But you haven't come here to hear from me, you've come here to hear from Richard. Welcome him, please.
Thanks very much, Duchess. Many of you have been given a warm welcome. For those of us who were at the Art Hotel last night, we had anything but a warm welcome. I don't know, we had no hot water. So, or at least we had on the Luke side of cool, or cool side of Luke, I think is what I like. And apologies for that, particularly for our overseas visitors. But, we're not in Lent, but we had a bit of penance come early. It's a great joy and a great honour for me to be with you today, because I wouldn't be standing here if it weren't for chaplains in a tertiary setting. I became a Jesuit as a result of two chaplains that I met at the University of Queensland, and both of those men had a profound impact on my life, and they were one wonderful thing about a Catholic priest I hadn't seen much before in them. They were both intelligent and joyous. If you're a joyous Christian, can you please tell your face about it sometime soon? Catholics, anyway, can be some of the gloomiest bunch you ever want to meet in your life. They haven't quite worked out that God's saving the world, and we just help out as best we can. Both of those men, I can vividly remember to this day, were so happy. Like, honestly, their faith, their hope and their love gave them an animation in their life that was irresistible. And it was so irresistible that I kept asking question after question until I'm standing here right now. Never underestimate the impact of your personal witness, way apart from your learning, from the extraordinary ability of you to counsel, from your wonderful accompaniment in pastoral care. Never underestimate that fundamental witness of your own faith, no matter what it might be. I'm more than conscious this morning my presentation is going to come out fairly and squarely out of the Christian tradition. But that doesn't mean that many of the things we're not walking and talking through this morning are not going to be incredibly relevant to every other faith tradition. What I want to help you do today is to think about digging, which I think is all about ancient wisdom, dialogue, conversations in which we have revelations, and diversity, rich insights into a complex world. I want to think about ancient wisdom, I want to think about revelation, and I do want to think about insights into a complex world that enable us to accompany students, especially when they have to make big decisions in their life. I want us to think about how we help the young people on the whole, generally the young adults given into our care or who choose to come along to be with us, how we help and walk with them when they have to make very complex decisions on multiple levels in a very complex world. I want to introduce you, and this won't come as a surprise for some of you who know the Society of Jesus, I want to introduce you to St. Ignatius Loyola. St. Ignatius Loyola was the founder of the Jesuits, and they say a Jesuit cannot get through a talk without mentioning St. Ignatius Loyola, so he's out early in this presentation. But St. Ignatius was an extraordinary man who, of the many gifts he gave the Roman Catholic community, the gift of discernment is one of the big ones. There are two famous works he wrote. The first is The Spiritual Exercises, and the second were the Rules for the Discernment of Spirits. And even though he's dead in 1556, his learning, I think, is as timeless and as important as it is today. And I think it transcends the boundaries of all our faith traditions because it's so profound, it's so human, and it's so practical. I'd hate you to walk away from this presentation saying, oh God, we've got another paper of someone with their head in the sky. I hope there's profound learning behind what I'm saying, but it's utterly practical. The first thing St. Ignatius says is that before we come to help anybody discern what they should do with their life or what choice they should make, you have to own the context. Running away from the context, pretending otherwise, doesn't help. I'm not sure about your particular country, but in many Western countries right now, the context for religious discernment in any faith tradition has never had less support and, in fact, more hostility than it has right now. Ignatius would say you can't run away from aggressive atheists if that happens to be your context. You have to own it. When people think we're mad for believing in anything, fairies in the garden, a sky daddy in heaven, and those of us of faith need psychological help because of our impaired psychology. Well, Ignatius says, don't run from that. Own it. Because that's the context in which we have to accompany people. Mind you, I love the story of the time the atheist was walking through Yosemite National Park and he was admiring the beautiful rivers, the wonderful animals, the extraordinary trees, and he heard a rustling in the bushes and he turned around to see an 8-foot grizzly bear now charging straight for him. Our atheist turns around, starts running up the path as fast as he could. His heart was pumping frantically. He tried to run even faster. He looked over his shoulder and the bear was making ground on him. So he tried to go more quickly, but then he tripped, fell to the ground, rolled over and found the bear on top of him, ready to take a final fatal swipe and take him out. It was then that our atheist looked to the heavens and said, "Oh my God, save me!" Time stopped. The bear froze. The sounds of the forest were silent. It was then that that famous bright light from heaven in many faith traditions shone upon the man. The voice came from the clouds and said, "Let me get this right. You tell everybody that I don't exist, that anybody who believes in me is mad, and that creation's just a bit of a cosmic accident. And now in your hour of need, you want me to save you as a Christian believer. Is that what's going down here?" To which the atheist, full of integrity, as they very often are in my experience, looked up into the heavens and said, "Oh God, I realise it would be wrong for you to save me now as a believer, but maybe you could make the bear a believer." "What a good idea," said God. And with that, the sound of the forest was gone, the light was gone, the sounds of the forest resumed, and the man was immediately felt blessed to see the bear immediately bring down his paws. He was even more relieved to see the bear sit back on his haunches. He was a little interested to see the bear bring those paws together, and decidedly uncomfortable when he heard the bear say, "For this food which I'm about to receive." Amen. You have to own the context. And one of the contexts that we're operating in, I work in universities, and I've been in chaplaincy, not officially, but I've certainly been around chaplaincy a long time. One of the contexts is we have colleagues on the campus, we have administrators, and we have the vast majority of students, in some circumstances, who think we're nuts. Own it.
And we are.
And we are. That's scary. So own the context. context, Ignatius would say, don't run from it. Because we've got to answer that. I wrote this little book. I'm not here just to peddle books. But I wrote this little book, What Are We Doing on Earth for Christ's Sake, as a response to Dawkins and Hitchens. Their claim on the Western imagination is quite significant, particularly with young adults. And saying, oh, we don't have to worry about them, don't give them too much attention, isn't helping. We actually do have, I think, intelligent, coherent, accessible things to say to aggressive atheists. I'm not trying to convert them, I'm simply trying to say their side is not the only side to every debate. So we own the context. Secondly, Ignatius says there are 3 blocks. Before you get to make a decision in the light of any faith, there are 3 blocks. Pride, honour, and riches. Now this is a man who knew nothing about Jung or Maslow, about Freud, but he knew something about humanity. He didn't know anything about psychology, but he knew something about humanity. Pride, honour, and riches. Pride. For St. Ignatius, the sin of pride was someone who we would now say is a control freak. They have to control everyone and everything. And Ignatius says if you need to control everyone and everything other than yourself, self-control, then you're going to make disastrous decisions because you're not as free as you can be in letting God be God, letting others exercise their free will, and indeed taking your place in the created order. Ignatius thought that one of the fundamental, if not original sins, and it's got some bearing in Genesis too, the fundamental original sin is where we want to be God, not the creature. And so Ignatius says, he has 3 tests. He says, can you back down? Can you say you're sorry? Can you say you're wrong? He thought those 3 questions kept the sin of pride in check. Can we back down? Can we say we're sorry? Can we say we're at fault? In my direct experience, that does somewhat, anyway, keep the sin of pride in some sort of check. That I'm a creature, I'm not the creator. I cannot control and run everything and everyone. Until you get that in order, Ignatius says, you're probably going to make fairly poor discernments. The second one is honour. For Ignatius, the honour was where we have to be liked by everyone. He said, if you need to be continually liked by everyone, you're not going to make good decisions. Because normally you're trying to make a decision or a choice that's going to keep everyone happy. And we see this with some of our young adults, don't we, in chaplaincy, where they're trying to keep their parents happy, or they're trying to keep their professors happy, or they're trying to keep their mentors or guardians, or whoever it is. It's someone external. And then, of course, Ignatius passionately believed that real discernment was where God comes into this equation is, what do you want? What are your desires? Ignatius thought that God's will was found in our purified desires. Oh, that's wonderful. We start with, what the hell do we want? What do we want? And then we purify that, because not every desire, as we know, is a pure one. So they're purified desires. That's fantastic. Fantastic. We're walking with young people, and with older people too, helping them discern how they might have purified desires. What is it that they want? And where does God fit into that worldview for them? What are they called to be? And who are they called to become? Ignatius said the thing about honour is that if you need everyone to like you all the time, then that blinds you to the sort of feedback that you might get about the decisions that you're taking. Because I'm the lump sum of all the decisions I've taken in my life and have been taken for me. And Ignatius says, unless you have people in your life who are giving you feedback, then you're in trouble if you can't hear it or they don't feel comfortable to give it to you, because you're operating in a vacuum, and as we all know, that's a very dangerous psychological space in which to operate. And so Ignatius said, are there people in our life who tell us the truth? Now I want to stay with truth for a minute. I don't know what your experience of universities is like, but you hear an awful lot about truth in almost, I'm just telling the truth, you hear from at meetings. I've discovered that some people have personality changes before they go to meetings. This is true in almost every single workplace I have ever been in my life. And can I say, at least Christian communities are not immune to this. Parish meetings can be disgraceful, council meetings can be disgraceful, Jesuit community meetings can be a disaster. So I'm not letting faith people off the hook here, because honestly some people are quite nice while we're having a cup of tea, and then we walk into the more formal, physical and emotional, more formal space of the meeting, and they become censorious, and they say disgraceful things, they're so rude, they're so direct. They wouldn't say this one-to-one outside. They get into a meeting, and all of a sudden their behaviour actually changes. Their deportment changes. And I wonder about that. And I think that Ephesians is helpful here. Paul's letter to Ephesians says, of course, that we tell the truth in love. We tell the truth in charity. I think that's helpful. For people of faith, we don't just tell the truth. We tell the truth in charity. We tell the truth in love. The harder the truth we want to say to somebody, the more charitable and loving we have to find a way of saying it. That's, I think, the sanest and best of our faith traditions. Because when I challenge people about their very poor behaviour at staff meetings now, they say things like, I only told the truth. Someone's got to tell the truth around this place. They wouldn't know the truth. It would bit them on the backside, this lot. I only told the truth. Ah, yes. But you didn't tell it in charity. You didn't tell it in love. So at home, at work, in our faith communities, do we tell each other the truth? We must. But we have to tell it in charity. We have to tell it in love. The harder the truth, the more charitable we have to find a way of saying it. And that's especially to those young people and older people, our students given into our care, who might need some feedback. They think they're coming over in one way, and we might have to take the risk as a person of faith in their life to tell them the truth in charity. Actually, you could be doing the greatest blessing, performing the biggest blessing in their life, though it won't be comfortable. Then the third one is riches, pride, honour and riches. Now, pardon a pun, for those of you who know the Jesuits, the Society of Jesus, it's a bit rich, a Jesuit talking about riches. We're good on many things, and real estate is one of them. Right around the world, we've been very good at real estate. Even though in several countries all of our property has been confiscated, Portugal wins the prize at least 4 times all our property, but Italy has done it 3 times. But we've still come back and bought decent real estate. And so it can be a bit rich, a Jesuit talking about riches. In fact, I love telling the story of the time I took my solemn vows as a Jesuit at a very famous high school that we run in Sydney called St Ignatius College, Riverview. Riverview is arguably the most beautiful school in Australia. Some of the Australians, anybody here has been to Riverview? You can tell the others later that I'm not making this up. We bought 77 hectares of a peninsula jutting into Sydney Harbour in 1870. It's a peninsula of Sydney Harbour. For the first 30 years, the only way onto that property was via the water. So all the beautiful old sandstone buildings are all built facing the water because you had to catch a boat to get there. And to this day, a Sydney Harbour ferry takes boys to school in the morning and takes them back to Circular Quay in Sydney in the afternoon. Generally a beautiful way, I would think, to go to school. And we have 14 ovals, we have 1,700 boys. It is just a magnificent piece of parkland on which there is this very fine school. Well, there's an 1892 chapel there, and I took my solemn vows of poverty, chastity and obedience in that chapel. My family come from the northern state of Queensland, and they had never been to Riverview in their life. So my mother and all my family came down from Queensland to Sydney and to attend, obviously, my final vow ceremony. And my mother was blown away by the beauty of this extraordinary school. And after I'd taken my vows, we walked out and she stopped on the top step of the chapel. She looked at the beautiful sandstone buildings, the Sydney CBD on the horizon, water on 3 sides of this peninsula, the manicured lawns and the sprinklers that went and my mother turned to me and she said, "If this is poverty, I want to see chastity." She said, "It's looking loose and fast to me." I said, "We're very good on obedience." Actually, I hope we're good on all 3, to be honest. Mind you, the other story we love telling against ourselves is, if you know Jesuits, they love sending ourselves up. We love sending ourselves up. is for this you've got to know in Catholic piety a novena is 9 days, 9 weeks or 9 months of prayer for a particular intention, and it's set in Dublin. I'm sorry for anybody here from Ireland. But up goes a young man to the Dominicans in Dublin. He says, "Father, I'm wanting to know, will you do a novena for me?" "I'll do the novena for you." He said, "What's the intention?" He said, "It's for Alexis." He said, "What in God's name is Alexis? I've never heard of Alexis." "Oh," he said, "Father, it's an unbelievably posh car, and God has told me I'm to have Alexis. I am not doing my 9 days of prayer for your Alexis. Get out of here." So he goes to the Franciscans, bad choice, but anyway, he goes to the Franciscans and he says, "Father, I'm wanting to know, will you do a novena for me?" "I'll do it for you." He said, "What's the intention?" He said, "It's for Alexis." He said, "I've never heard of Alexis. What in God's name is Alexis?" He said, "Oh, Father, it's an absolutely magnificent car, and God has told me in my prayer I'm to have Alexis." He said, "I'm not doing my 9 weeks of prayer for your Alexis. Get out of here." So he goes to the Jesuits' famous church called Sacred Heart, Gardner Street in Dublin. He finds a Jesuit and he says, "Father, I'm wanting to know, will you do a novena? Before you ask me, Father, the intention is for Alexis, and before you ask me that, Alexis is an incredibly posh car, and God has told me I am to have one." To which the Jesuit looks up and says, "Oh, God, man, I know what Alexis is, but what's a novena?" We've got to be careful about riches. You know, at least in the Christian tradition, money is value neutral. It's what you do with it that tells me who you are. I know some extremely wealthy people who I think are outstanding believers because they share what they've got generously. I know some desperately poor people who've got nothing and share everything. They're great believers too. It's what you do with it that tells me who you are. And Ignatius rightly knew that people get caught up in possessions where it possesses them. It ends up dictating all the decisions that they make. In this country right now, what is the largest faculty on every single campus where it's offered? Finance, economics, business. Welcome to the Western world. Now, I'm not against finance, business or economics, but what's the culture behind that choice? What's going on there? Homo economus. We are now defined by our economics. As some of you know, we've just had a federal election. Barely anything much rated a mention except our bottom line, our trade, our money. Now, I know it's important, don't get me wrong, but it's not simply that defines us. For my money, when we even go near the media, we start to hear the story. Do you know the 2 biggest seductive things in terms of riches are money and celebrity? Right now, they're very seductive for people to get a lot of money and to have your 5 minutes of fame. And if I can give you an example, at least from Australia, and I think the United States and Europe and Canada, honestly, look at the real-life television programs, what people will do on national television. So I call these programs ritual humiliation. They're highly ritualised. The Bachelor, The Bachelorette, Farmer Wants a Wife, Married at First Sight. MasterChef's a little bit different, isn't so humiliating. My Kitchen Rules, I don't know if you know these programs in your country, but honestly, they tend to be predicated on conflict, anger, and humiliation. They're the predications of them. Now, we're calling that entertainment. I don't think we've come very far from the Colosseum, where we fed not just lions, by the way. Christians love thinking there were only lions that were sacrificed. There were lots of people. Jews, all sorts of other groups were equally... it was a genocide in the Colosseum. But for sport, they turned up to watch the baying for blood and the offering of a human sacrifice. I think we've got a media human sacrifice on television right now. Because it makes a stack of money. That's why they're on television. They rake their socks off, they go to number 1, and they're ritually humiliating. We're watching people. Now, people say, well, they're doing it freely. Yes, but there are 2 huge seductions. They're all paid, though not much, I concede. And secondly, the 5 minutes of fame is a very destructive, very attractive and seductive thing in the world right now. So, to what degree do we possess money, or does it possess us? I think we have to ask that fairly carefully. Now, rather than talk about this, I want to show you a clip out of a film which I think, highlights and focuses our discussion about discernment. I want to show you a clip out of the great English film Billy Elliot. Who here has seen the film Billy Elliot? Okay. For those of you who haven't, let me fill it in. It's subtitled. I've subtitled it for you if the language is sometimes a little difficult to understand. Billy's mother dies at the beginning of this film, and he lives at home with his father and his older brother and his grandmother. His father is the union organiser of the local mine, and they're out on strike. And they've been out on strike for about a year. They've got one more year to go, based on the true strike in the mid-1980s. But this family is dead broke, but they still find money to send Billy off to do what every Elliot man has done for 4 generations, we're told at one stage in the film, to learn how to box. But when he gets to the local hall, he hates boxing. But he finds on the other side of the room divide Mrs. Wilkinson's ballet class. And so he joins that class. And he's got natural aptitude, extension, poise. He's just a natural ballet dancer. So much so that he goes every single day for 10 months. And eventually Mrs. Wilkinson puts him in the regional auditions for the Royal Ballet School when they come to the north of England and to County Durham, where Billy lives. And he's successful, so now he's into the finals in London. We want to pick up this clip where Dad's just found out a couple of things. Billy has not been doing boxing for 10 months, he's been doing ballet. He's gone through one lot of auditions and he's into the finals. They're dead broke, and they now have to get to London to go to the very posh Royal Ballet School. And Dad thinks everything in this father's DNA would say, this choice is the wrong choice for my son. This man has an enormous discernment to go through. So we'll chart the anatomy of a choice. I want to apologise for some of you for the language in this film. They dropped the F-bomb a little too much for my taste, but at least it's on free-to-air television in this country every 3 or 4 weeks. So obviously we've got a bit over this, but I know some of you would find this offensive language, and I apologise for that. That said, I don't think it's gratuitous. I'm not sure it's simply there for shock value. I don't think miners in the north of England, when they're a bit exasperated, say, oh golly gosh, an awful lot. So I don't think it's just there gratuitously. But don't lose the wood for the trees. Even though it jars us, or some of us, when we hear it, then I think the fundamental values here, and I think the fundamental learning here, is very rich and compatible with our faith traditions indeed. And I also show you a film in this keynote address, because the young people especially given to your care are visual learners. They won't listen to what you say, they won't read the wonderful articles you give them, but you show them something visual or give them an image to take away. It's profoundly important. This learning is exactly where they would be at if they were sitting here right now. Let's enjoy 17 minutes of Billy Elliot. We want to pick it up where Dad goes to meet or confront Mrs. Wilkinson on Christmas Eve. And we'll get the lights out in a minute.
This is a friend of yours. How much is it going to cost?
Happy Christmas to you too. Not as much as you might think. Maybe £2 grand. But there's a good chance the council's...
£2 grand? I was talking about the additions.
Look, it's just a matter of the trip to London. I'll give you the money for the fare.
I didn't come here to be patronised.
Oh, no one's trying to patronise you. You're being ridiculous.
Am I?
Yes.
Thanks for everything you've done for Billy. But he's my son, isn't he? I'll handle this myself. see you've come to your senses.
It's a big man now, eh?
Hey, look here, you lot. Oi, all aboard the Skylark, supply me.
Can't smoke on here, mate. These are private buses.
What the fuck is he doing, Tony? It's okay. He's gonna be okay.
Just get him out of here, Tony.
Oh, wait, Peter, what? Let's go home now.
That's right, you know. I would have let you.
All them 50 pences. Here, it was a toss-up between a new punch bag or you.
It's not even enough for the bed and breakfast, man. Forget about it. You're dreaming. Look at you fucking scrabbling around for 50 pences. You've got to do better than that.
Oh, I'm going to have a raffle at the welfare. And I'm going to organise a concert.
Thanks, George.
She's not got that kind of money. She can't even keep the suitcase open.
George said
There's no money left. Get that through your head, man. George, you know there's nothing left. Stop putting that in his head, man. Come on, lads. Dig for the night,
lovely, this is it.
So what's it like?
What's what like?
London?
I don't know, son. I never made it past Durham.
Have you never been, like?
Why would I want to go to London?
It's the capital city.
Well, there's no mines in London.
Christ. Is that all you think about?
Down. Tiny curvature here. Head down.
How tiny?
Might not be a problem. Come on, keep going. Right. Right, jump up, William.
It's Billy. Billy. 2, 3, and 4. Dad! Dad, fuck's sake! Change my mind.
Get back. And you are?
Billy Elliot from Everington.
I beg your pardon?
Billy Elliot.
Ah, yes, of course. Well, come to the bar, please, Billy.
Left arm on the bar. Feet first. Arm second. Demi-plie. And hold.
Now, Billy, I'd like to see you move to some music. Do you have a piece prepared?
Thank you.
You alright? What's the matter? It was a waste of fucking time. Don't be upset. It's only a stupid audition. It's alright. Fuck off! So what's next? Look! Fuck off with this! You big bastard!
What on earth's going on here?
Over the moon.
Shit! Mr. Elliot, I'm afraid that mutual respect and self-discipline are absolute prerequisites for any pupil in this school. Such displays of violence cannot be tolerated under any circumstances, do you understand? I realize we shall have to consider this very seriously, and it will be bound to affect our final decision. Yes, well, just a few questions then. Billy, can you tell us why you first became interested in the ballet?
Dunno. Just was.
Well, was there any particular aspect of the ballet which caught your imagination?
Dancing?
He dances all the time, every night after school.
Yes, well, we have a very enthusiastic letter from Mrs. Wilkinson, and she has told us of your personal circumstances. Mr. Elliot, are you a fan of the ballet?
I wouldn't exactly say I was an expert.
Do realize that all pupils must attain the highest standards, not just in ballet, but in their ordinary academic work. No child can succeed without the 100% support of the family. You are completely behind, Billy. Are you not?
Yes. Yes, of course.
Anyone else ask any questions?
No, not really, no.
Well, in that case, we shall let you know in due course.
Just one last question. Can I ask you, Billy, what does it feel like when you're dancing?
Dunno. Sort of feels good. It's sort of stiff and that. But once I get going, then I like forget everything. And sort of disappear. Sort of disappear. I can feel a change in your whole body. And like there's fire in my body. Just there. Flying. Like a bird. Like electricity. Yeah. Like electricity.
Have a safe journey home. Mr. Elliot, good luck with the strike.
Toast. Maybe you should get yourself a trade, son. Something useful. I could have been a professional dancer.
What's happened to the dinosaurs, miss? They were crushed as well. And the pressure of all of this caused the plants and trees to change. To fall.
Oh, that's what must have happened to him.
Michael Caffrey, if you have got something to say, you can say it to the class.
Sorry, miss.
So, gradually, over hundreds of thousands of years,
Post!
That's it, that.
Have you had anything yet?
not yet.
You have no problem, man. Fingers crossed, eh?
families here. Sorry, mate. It's all right, Tony. It's me, Michael. Remember? It's Michael. What are you doing? Putting a list up for the world.
Billy, you found me here. Thanks.
I know we could watch that for the rest of the day. A very quick stand-up break, just for a couple of seconds. Okay, let's get going. Thanks very much. There's method to the stand-up madness. You know, we go to conferences where we sit and sit and sit for hours sometimes. It's very bad pedagogy. For those of us who teach in universities, if you've done any reading and research in adult learning, adults have to learn a move every 30 to 40, 45 minutes generally. Anyway, I love Billy Elliot. Everything about that film says that Dad shouldn't make that decision, yet he does, because it comes down to what he loves. And that can sound terribly airy-fairy and not particularly in touch with reality, and it ends up, in fact, the most profound insight, not just from faith traditions, but into profound humanity as well. And I love this quote out of Pedro Rupe. He was the boss of the Jesuits for 25 years. Nothing is more practical than finding God, that is, than falling in love in a quite absolute final way. What you're in love with, what seizes your imagination, will affect everything. It'll decide what will get you out of bed in the morning, what you do with your evenings, how you spend your weekends, what you read, what you know, what breaks your heart, what amazes you with joy and gratitude. Fall in love, stay in love, and it will decide everything. Billy Elliot, us, the students given into our care, what are our desires, our purified desires? What is it that we love if we're going to dig and be in dialogue in a diverse world? Well, here's a practical approach to it. Here's my summary of St. Ignatius' rules for the discernment of spirits, making this utterly practical from here on in. Trust the commonplace, the ordinary, and the everyday. St. Ignatius noticed that people lived in an unhealed past or an unknown future. An unhealed past. He didn't have this language because it's fairly modern psychological language, but we would now say we all need, and our students need, to get some closure on an unhealed history, because it's not in the past, it's in the present. And in one of his letters he's had a lovely line. Why is it when I mention a name, people can fly into a rage? Boy, that's a good criteria. What are the names that are mentioned in our life where it just has to be mentioned and we have a visceral response? A person could be living or dead. It's a wonderfully practical guide. of getting closure on our past, because it's not in our past. It takes the name and it's back into our present in a fairly visceral way. He also noticed that people lived in an unknown future. His line, not original but wonderful, in fact it goes back to Plato and Aristotle, we've got to plan for our future, not live it. We're bad at this and so are our students. Plan for the future, not live it. You can't destine what's going to happen next week or next month or next year. And yes, kids think constantly in the future after their degree and they have to plan for it, but not live it. It's a very important distinction because it can affect number two, not living in the here and now, not taking life one day at a time. If this is starting to sound like an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting, well, I'm Richard and I'm an alcoholic. I'm not yet anyway, and I like red wine far too much for that. But I want to think about Bill, the founder of AA. I want to give Bill a posthumous Nobel Peace Prize. They don't give posthumous Nobel Prizes. You have to be alive to get it, except for the poor Canadian, I think, who got it in physics a few years ago, and he died the day it was announced, and they went ahead with that one, and rightly so. But I want to make an exception for Bill. I think the 12-step program is one of the most practical, diverse, in dialogue spiritual programs I know. There would be a rare family here right now where someone somewhere hasn't benefited from one of the 12-step programs in all its many and varied forms right now. Well, Bill founded AA in 1937, or at least officially the first formal group in New York City. And in that group of 11 people, one of them was a recovering alcoholic who was also a Jesuit priest. And he and Bill, who was a practicing Episcopalian, a practicing Anglican, we'd say here in Australia, they became very great friends, so much so that Bill did the 30 days of silence and prayer of St. Ignatius's spiritual exercises in 1938. And at the end of the spiritual exercises, Ignatius has in a footnote, spiritual sanity is found in taking life one day at a time with God. Bill took off God at the end for obvious marketing reasons, and I'm not saying that crudely, just to make it inclusive, but take life one day at a time. By the way, we Jesuits have to do the 30-day retreat. Many other priests and religious do it as well, and lay people in the Catholic Church, and well beyond the Catholic community, do the 30-day retreat. I did it when I was 25. I'm a Jesuit novice, and I came off the 30-day retreat. I rang my mother in Queensland from Sydney, and I said, I've just finished the 30-day retreat. My mother said, did you shut up for the last 30 days? And I said, oh yes, except to talk to the director for 40 minutes every day, which you're allowed to do. I kept the silence. She didn't say a word. I said, are you still there? She said, I'm still here. This is the happiest day of my life. I said, why? She said, Richard, you came out of my womb talking, and you shut up for the last 30 days. I need no further evidence. There must be a God. Taking life here and now. Now, let me give you a practical example. Last year was the first time at weddings that I do most Saturday that I saw this on the inside of the order of service. We have hired our own photographer and videographer. Please do not photograph or record our wedding. We want to see your face, not your iPad. Think about what brides and grooms now see. They come down the aisle to iPads and iPhones. Here's my problem. I love the media. I work in the media. I work for the Australian Catholic Bishops' Conference, running their office for film and broadcasting. I am no enemy of the media, but we are so busy commenting on our experience, I do not believe we're having it. I think we've lost our ability to savour. We are moving, the caravan's moving from one to the next, to the next, to the next. And some of the religious traditions are moving with it. I think we've lost our ability to stay. To stay. To savour. In every major religious tradition in this room right now, the ability to stay, to savour, is a profound insight of its spirituality. And I think if we're chaplains worth our salt, we're going to go against the grain somewhat and help people have the experience, even if it be a tough one, and not move on too quickly. Number 3 is don't make a decision when we're down. Be careful of emotional haste. Ignatius says that sometimes we should be suspicious of the urgent. Oh, I love that line. Be suspicious of the urgent. Don't reject the urgent. Some things are urgent, but be suspicious of it. When a person sends me an email with a red exclamation mark, which means it's urgent, when I read it and find it's not urgent, in actual fact what I do is I won't reply to them for 3 days. Firstly, to drive them nuts, and secondly, because it wasn't urgent in the first place. We overuse two words in the Western world right now, crisis and urgent. Not everything's a crisis. Many crises are politically manufactured, and not everything is urgent. I think we've got bad at criteria, at a hierarchy of what really matters, and then let other things will take care of themselves. I think we've got better at sorting. One of the things I think chaplains help some students do is sort. I think they sort, trying to balance off to help people sort as best we can. Take wise advice wisely from those we love, from the church and from professionals, or from our religious tradition and from professionals. Do you know, when you join the Jesuits, at least in my time, we were told as part of our formation we're going to have to go and see a psychiatrist for an entire year to go into a psychotherapeutic relationship twice a week, every week, for an entire year. So, in theory, to sort your stuff out so you don't lump it on to the people of God for the rest of your life. Now, I don't know what it is about me. Many of my contemporaries at that time really resented that they were forced to go and see these psychiatrists. I don't know what it says about me. I loved it. I loved it. Someone was paid to listen to me twice a week for an entire year. But Professor Ian Curtis gave me two pieces of advice that I've never forgotten, and I think they're good for chaplains. Firstly, he said, I know when an adolescent has moved into adulthood, when they've forgiven their parents for being their parents. He said he wasn't talking about abusive, criminal, or negligent parenting. That's of a very different order. That needs very intensive therapy, clearly. He said, I'm talking about the normal mum and dad who got a lot of things right, mucked up a few things, and really mucked up a couple of things badly, but they did their best with what they had. He said, I cannot tell you how many 55-year-olds I meet who are still blaming mum and dad for everything. And their authority issues are their unresolved adolescent angst. And it's all still working itself out years later. And secondly, he gave me a piece of advice. He said, I know when an adolescent has moved into adulthood when they're not 15 emotionally. And by that he meant they're not all or nothing, black and white, right and wrong, good and bad. If only the world was that simple. Now, a 15-year-old can be indulged. He gave me the example of a 15-year-old who goes to mum and dad and says, I want to go to that dance at the local hall on Saturday night. And dad says, oh darling, we'd be delighted for you to go to that dance on Saturday night, but mum and I want you home at 10:30. And the 15-year-old will say, oh, I'm not going then. Oh, I'm not going. If I can't stay up to midnight like everybody else, I'm not going. And she won't go. She'll stay at home and pout and slam doors and sulk because she couldn't work out that the offer on the table was a really good offer. Ian Curtis said, I cannot tell you how many 60-year-olds I know who are 15 emotionally. It's all or nothing. It's black and white. And guess what? In my many years of working and studying in universities, academia does not help emotional maturity. I have been in faculty meetings where people, if they don't get their way, oh, paddle your own canoe, I'm out of here. There are only two responses here, all or nothing, right or wrong, black and white, or right and good and right and wrong, black and white, good and bad. It's 15. Sometimes we've got to help our colleagues, and we've got to help our students to grow past the 15-year-old binary form, the dichotomy of simply. The world is full of emotional compromise. Now, some compromises we can't make. They are so who we are as people of belief in whatever tradition we hold. All right? But they're of a very high order. Some people turn everything into Custer's last stand. Everything. And it's a sign of immaturity. Not that I'm good at taking this advice, I'm just good at giving it out in conferences like this. I'm regularly 15-year-old. I'm the superior of my Jesuit community in Sydney. Go and talk to them, they'll tell you how 15 I am regularly. And I'd like to tell you a wonderful story of a moment I did not take wise advice wisely. My first appointment was as a deacon and the assistant priest at St Canice's of King's Cross in Sydney. That's the red light district of Sydney. women in prostitution, boys in prostitution, street kids, runaways, you name it, we had it. Substance abusers, we had it. And it's a fantastic parish. The Jesuits have had that parish for 32 years now. It's been an enormous blessing for our order. And it was my first pastoral appointment as a deacon and assistant priest. And I had a 71-year-old Irishman who was my parish priest when I arrived. And although I was 29, he was 71, we became very, very good friends. So much so that he loved having a bit of a go at me, particularly at staff meetings. Well, this one Thursday morning staff meeting, we gathered to read over the scriptures for the coming Sunday, to reflect on what they might mean, and to talk about what our homily might be about this coming Sunday. And I was down to preach at all the Masses this coming Sunday. It was Trinity Sunday, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And after the silence, the Irish parish priest turned to me and he said, "And what newfangled theology about the Trinity are we going to get from the young deacon this Sunday? I can hardly contain me excitement at the whole new theology we're going to get about the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Oh my God, give me a little bit of a taster, a little bit of a curtain raiser right here, right now, about what we're going to get." And I said, "Donald, I actually have thought about what I'm going to say. I'm getting into the pulpit and saying that while Father, Son, and Holy Spirit are privileged names for God, they, in the Christian tradition, they don't exhaust the possibilities. And so while we should be able to call God our perfect Father in heaven, all Christians should be equally able to call God our perfect Mother in heaven, and that shouldn't ruffle us at all, because God's greater than any name we can ever give God. God's beyond names." Well, Donald never said, "No, don't do it." He used to say, "I'd be slow on that one." And now he was doubled over in the chair going, "I'd be slow on that one. I'd be very, very slow on that one." I didn't take wise advice wisely. There we were on Saturday night, 6 o'clock, Vigil Mass. And we had all the normal parishioners in. We had 140 adolescent girls from St Vincent's College, Potts Point, the oldest Catholic school in Australia. The boarders still come over to the local parish during term time. I had 140 adolescent girls sitting in front of me. And in the front row I had Con, the most famous homeless and alcoholic man in King's Cross, and our leading parishioner. He came to every single thing in the parish, normally for the tea, the biscuits, the wine, or the beer that followed. And Con, we used to think, went to sleep in the front row of the church, and most times he did. Well, I got into the pulpit and started giving out God, our perfect Mother in heaven. And maybe expressing a majority position in the congregation, I suggest, Con jumped up and said this: "God's not our mother. God's not our mother. Mary's our mother, and God's our Father." And then he turned to Father Donald, who was saying the Mass, I'm the deacon, and he said, "Father Donald, this dickhead hasn't got a clue." And then he looked back at the congregation and said, "If you're listening to this bullshit, you need your head bridged." And with that walked out of St Canice's. At that moment I looked down and 140 adolescent Catholic girls thought, "This is the best Mass I've ever had." The drunk took on the priest and won. I looked at my normal parishioners, they were hysterical with laughter. I looked over at Donald, he had tears coming down his face, and I did what could only be done in the circumstance. I looked back at the congregation and said, "In the name of the Father, and the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, Amen." When I sat down, Donald leant over to me and he said, "I told you to be slow on that." So we take wise advice wisely from those who love the church and from professionals. I'm going to go slightly over. We started a bit late. Sorry about that. Is that okay? I promise I won't be too much over. Learn the patterns. You know, Ignatius says that there's always a pattern. If we want to help our students make good choices, and if we want to be in dialogue with their experience, try sorting out the patterns. That's why in Ignatian spirituality we have an examen. We're supposed to do it twice a day, at least once a day. It wasn't to bash ourselves up, which it did become over hundreds of years, of how awful I am and God forgive me. But part of it is about asking for forgiveness, but actually it's about starting to see where's the pattern. Every religious tradition believes there's a pattern to light and a pattern to darkness. Learn the pattern. When people say, "I fly off the handle," I don't know, that just happens. I don't know, I gamble too much, that just, oh gee, I drink too much, that just happens. Oh, I download porn, gee, I do that a bit too much, that just happens though. No, no, no. If it's a repeat offence, there's there's a pattern here. We've got to learn the patterns. If you want to change the destructive behaviour, then we have to learn the pattern. And these days, of course, they talk about the 8 narcotics. I love the word narcotic. Those of us who know Greek, narcosis in Greek, meaning to dull the pain. They don't take the pain away. They mask the pain. And these are no surprises here. Alcohol. These are the 8 narcotics, the 8 patterns of destructive behaviour. Alcohol, drugs, sex, food, work, gambling, technology, and shopping. If you just scored 6 out of 8 of those, which you see straight after this, it's not one of those. It's now a combination for us and the students given into our care. All of those are good things. All of those are good things in themselves. They can turn on a dime, and they can be so destructive in people's lives. Ignatius says, if you want to make good choices, you're going to have to learn the pattern of what leads to life and love and God by whatever name, and what leads to destruction and to some pretty awful behaviour that seems to be coming up again and again and again. The bad spirit divides, isolates and locks us in our fears. The Holy Spirit draws us out to be open and transparent. Do you know, when anyone ever says to me, Father, I've never told anybody this before, when a student comes and says to us, I need to tell you something I have never told anybody, I'm already singing hallelujah before I hear what it is. Because when it's better out than in. I hate to give you a very basic analogy, but it's like diarrhea and vomiting. It's better out than in. Because as Eric Fromm said so famously in 1951, we are as sick as our secrets. Oh boy, that's an insight. We are as sick as our secrets. When a person, when a community, when a church, when a faith tradition is sitting on a secret, the Catholic Church is right at the moment being exposed in the most gross of ways, along with many other denominations and faith traditions too, in the Royal Commission about sexual abuse and its covered up. We have been unbelievably sick for a very long time because we sat on a secret and we wanted to keep it that way. I think these moments, as painful as they are for the whole community, are incredibly healthy. They're about new life. Drawing it out to be open and transparent and calling our students to do it too, helping them to do it, because I certainly know it's destructive when we're divided, isolated and locked in fear. Feelings and thoughts matter. I think Christianity is the worst offender here. Hinduism, Islam, Judaism and other faith traditions tend not to be as trapped in the head, but Christianity, and dare I say Catholicism in particular, we tend to be terribly heady. It's all up here. Well, actually, I think the best of religion is about good thoughts. I'm a Jesuit. We like a few good thoughts. But it's about how we feel and how we intuit. So we don't exclude the mind. Anybody who's a chaplain who is sort of anti-intellectual, that worries me too. I want to think things through carefully. But someone who's only there, well, that's a worry. But I also wanted to get in contact with how I feel and how I intuit. How do I intuitively move into the world? I think that's the task of making a good choice, getting all of those wonderful facilities together in our own psychological makeup. And this is explicitly, well, it's from the scriptures, Christian scriptures, but it's not, we don't own it. Galatians 5:22, what's the most loving, joyful, peaceful, patient, kind, generous, faithful and self-controlled thing to do? You find echoes of that, of course, in Aristotle, and we find it, or an echo of it, in Buddhism, in Hinduism, in Islam, in Judaism. So Paul collected them together, but we have no ownership of them. But I think they're stunning. If we want to make a good decision in the light of our religious faith, no matter how diverse this community in front of me might be right now, what choice, what decision, who do I become when I make that choice? What brings out of me more love, more joy, more peace, more patience, more kindness, more generosity, more fidelity, and unashamedly, unapologetically, more self-control? And then finally, the world doesn't revolve around me. No work for the coming of the kingdom, or the coming of any of the main tenets of religion, is too small, irrelevant, or inconsequential. Sometimes we think it's all got to be big and spectacular if it's about a religious action in the world or discerning in the light of faith. And actually, I think it comes back to small acts of goodness and kindness. I think love beats hate every single day in this world because of the accumulative effect of small acts of goodness. They don't get onto the nightly news or into the newspaper. They're not online in anywhere near like we hear about evil and destruction and despicable behaviour. I'm not running away from evil, and I take it very seriously. People say to me regularly, as a priest who works in cinema, "Oh, what do you think of all those demonic possession films?" And I say, I think they're rubbish. Not because I don't take evil seriously. I take it so seriously that I'm not prepared to think about the Amityville horror, or I'm not prepared to give it too much attention. I want to put more attention on the fact that 36,000 people will die today of starvation in a world in which we have been able to feed everyone since 1957. That's evil. So don't give me cinema's take on a haunted house. Let's talk about social justice and how our responsibilities in every faith tradition to the widow, the orphan, the poor and the outcast. No work for the coming of any religious moment, of any choice in the light of faith, is too small, irrelevant or inconsequential. I don't think that anything I've spoken about in this keynote address today is easy. I think it's extremely difficult. I just think that you're in a privileged position as chaplains to some wonderful, wonderful people who are searchers and thinkers and open to new possibilities for their lives and for their learning, and you have the opportunity to say to them and to accompany them to dig deeply about ancient wisdom, some explicitly today out of the Christian tradition, but with all sorts of echoes right across all the religious traditions, to have ancient wisdom, to get in dialogue with the best of revelation for their own lives, so that they might go as people of faith, or even as the best human beings they can, into being in dialogue with a very diverse and sometimes hostile world to all things religious. I don't think it's easy, so let me do what I think ministers, priests, imams, rabbis do best. Let me bless you for the task now at hand with some ancient Jewish words. My peace be upon you forever. My love be within your hearts. My spirit will keep you safe all your days. My peace be upon you forever. My love be within your hearts. My spirit will keep you safe all your days. Thanks very much.
Richard, thank you. You've made us laugh. You've given us lots to think about. You've blessed us. Not just with the final blessing words, but with all your words. Thank you so much for coming.